Hi, welcome to Mental Health Monday, friends. Today we have with us Dr. Kim Markshausen, our special guest for this year for Mental Health Mondays. We've been so grateful to have you, Kim. Number one, want to
Oh,
say that right out of the gate.
it,
Um,
it's
sorry.
been great. It's just been great to have these conversations. I'm sad this is the last one, but it is a good one.
It is a good one. It is a good one. And so, yeah, I think if I just want to remind the listener that if you're interested in understanding a little bit more about how we develop and how our brains and our cognitive faculties, especially, help us engage in that developmental process a little bit more, build our awareness of how God made our heart, soul, mind, and strength to interact in order to work from birth and before birth, right, until natural death, that He has this big plan, I guess, for our growth.
Hmm.
And He made us to be growth oriented. And that's what Kim and I
Yes.
are always talking about here on Mental Health Mondays this year. And so you can see that at each stage of life, if you will, in our
Yeah.
Mental Health Monday talks. So go to the YouTube channel, Heidi Gaiman Writes. You can look up on the Facebook archives on Heidi Gaiman Writes on Facebook. And I know they're also available on my website, HeidiGaben.com. But then, Kim, I've seen you share them and post them on Facebook as
Hmm.
well. So you can go to any of those places. Today, we are going to talk about some practical tools, if you will, that we can use to engage in our awareness of making meaning in our lives, which really feeds the final segment of the developmental process, which we've talked about this, how we return to these things again and again, although they are also kind of a process through the whole lifespan, to this last one called integrity. And the developmental theory from Erik Erikson calls this stage integrity versus despair. Integrity
Hmm.
versus despair. And that one sounds like such a dramatic one, I think.
Yes.
Trust versus mistrust, I feel like sounds a lot less concerning than integrity versus despair. And I think, honestly, partly because this is the work of spirituality in our lives. Like, we are looking
Hmm.
for meaning. And so it does matter. It matters
Yes.
eternally. Um, and it builds on all the other ones, right? So identity and belonging help feed how we understand meaning and our sense of self in our life, but also that sense of belonging. So it's a bigger thing. It wraps
Yeah.
around all the other things. So do you have any thoughts on this stage of integrity versus despair before we get to our tools for making meaning?
Well, it does sound really black and white, doesn't it? And I liked your comparison to trust versus mistrust because that really is an on or an off. Either you trust or you don't trust. But integrity versus despair is more of a continuum, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
And that's how we can fit in all those other things that are along that developmental pathway because
Mm-hmm.
it's a lot of different pieces that make up our integrity,
Mm-hmm.
and we can be kind of weak in a couple of areas and not fall into despair, but you reach a tipping point
Mm-hmm.
when despair becomes what you're thinking about. And so I love the ideas we're going to talk about
Mm-hmm.
because they really are the kind of things that build those neural structures that
Mm-hmm.
keep you focusing in the good direction.
Yeah, absolutely. And we have quite a few listeners online right now. And so if you are watching or listening, feel free to throw up some questions in the comments. We want to hear your thoughts as well on these practices or anything that you've also utilized to build the growth mindset, the developmental processes, your awareness of them in your life, and how God is working in your life to make meaning. So the first one, Kim, I call practices of connection. Practices
Yes.
of connection. And this is, about relationship, but also mostly about the building blocks, though, because we'll talk about practices of intimacy in a little bit. This is more those building blocks we need before we get to identity, before we get to the relationships itself. So, more relationship with all the things in our life and how we see things. So, Kim, do you want to tell us about negative vision?
Negative
Negative vision. It's,
visualization.
yeah, visualization.
It's
Yeah.
it's one of those things where the name is really awful, but the practice is really good, isn't it? And I love how you talked about building blocks too, because all of these things are about, they're not quick fixes.
Mm-mm.
They're good things to practice in your life and to teach to members of your family because they build things over time. But negative visualization sounds like you should be focusing on the bad things in your life. And no, we don't want to do
It
that.
does sound like that. So
Yeah.
just to clarify, we're not focusing on the negative. If you need to do that for a hot second, though, I do want to invite you that, we're not going to Pollyanna things here. Actually, I
Right.
think you'll see how Kim's practice of negative visualization is going to help us to hold both the struggle and the good gifts at the same time.
Very much.
Yeah,
Very much. Yeah.
teach us, Kim.
We just don't want to ruminate on the struggle, and because that keeps our focus so narrow. So negative visualization, I think, comes from the idea of a negative for a photograph, where you're
Hmm.
looking at the negative space in it as opposed to looking at the photograph. You're seeing it in the opposite way. So what you do with negative visualization is you think about, what would my life be like without a particular blessing?
Mm.
And so you think about that for a little bit because it reminds you of the things that you're grateful for.
Hmm.
So if I'm thinking, what if someone hadn't mentored me to become a teacher? What would be missing in my life? Well, I might be in a career that was not fulfilling to me.
Hmm.
I might not have had the opportunity to do the kind of ministry God planned for me.
Hmm.
And so you can see, as you said, it combines that negative with the positive. So if I happen to be unhappy with my work situation at the moment, and I think, what if I didn't have this job?
Hmm.
Or what if I didn't have that coworker who's driving me nuts today?
Hmm.
It just broadens your perspective where you can think, all right, these are the things I don't like about my situation, but here are the things that I do like. Now I'm looking at it in a different way.
Hmm.
Now I'm doing a balance kind of thing
Oh, yeah.
instead of just focusing on negative.
Yeah, in both CBT and DBT, we talk about that all or nothing thinking that
Right.
gets really embedded, right? It's very easy to stay in the always or never, or in the space of I can't, and we get kind of stuck there. And so I like how this process of negative visualization, and I kind of picture it like the white space on a page. My whole life is filled with things. If I start taking things away, sometimes that's a healthy process, and sometimes we need that in our life, but also sometimes we're missing out then, and recognizing both of those places. And that helps us remember at least our connections. So in that way, it is involved in that trust versus mistrust, that there are people, places, spaces, items, spiritual constructs, all of the stuff that
Yeah.
I am connected to in this life, which also tells my body that I'm not alone. So just the
Right.
even reminder of this coworker's existence helps me remember that I do not walk in this life on my own without things and people and all of that good stuff to fill them. Even though that doesn't mean I'm gonna love the situation. It's being more
Yeah.
realistic about it instead of only
Right.
seeing the bad. Yeah, that's really helpful.
And I like the example of the coworker too, because if you're going to deal with that situation that's bothering you, you've got to remember what are the good things about that
Mm-hmm.
coworker too, because that's the route you're going to take to be able to deal with the situation,
Mm-hmm.
and to fix things and to get back onto a good track.
Yeah, I think, like you said too, opening the lens broader helps us remember that we're capable, that we have more gifts at our disposal, more people or more skills in order to tackle that thing as well. Like you said, the rumination, which is a fancy word for
Yeah.
very repetitive, ingrained thinking over and over, and not being able to think about something else, gets us in a real difficult place where we don't feel capable, and that can then lead to that despair, sense of hopelessness that I can't do anything about this situation. So, yeah, oh, that's a good practice. Thanks for that. Negative visualization.
Sensation. Yeah.
Negative visualization. Okay. So, next is our practice of identity. Practice of identity. And so, my favorite I have, a lot of different practices for identity because I think we're all always working on it for the most part.
Right.
But I work a lot with middle schoolers, junior hires, and teens. And so they're really in that core developmental space of identities. So I have to get real creative. But one of my favorite things I've found is the brain dump. And I was just talking on KFUO about this a little bit too on Mental Health Monday over there. But the brain dump, it serves us because it's a really broad practice that you can do with anything. Similar to negative visualization, you could pick whatever the struggle is and go with that for this thing. The brain dump is basically giving space to let things out of our minds so that we don't hold them quite so closely. Holding things closely leads to anxiety oftentimes and can lead to that despair because, again, I feel like it's me, and only me trying to work through this or trying to process the struggle. And so the reason this is helpful for identity is because we often need the reminder that I am not this thought. I am not this skill, right? I am not this place that I'm in right now. And so the brain dump, you can Pinterest this. I was telling everyone on the radio this morning, because there's so many varieties of it. It can be really helpful for emotions in particular, because those are things that we are so often led to believe that are the definitive thing that tell us who we are. And so this can help us instead to just acknowledge them, but to move on past them, use them as indicators as they are intended to be, and then move forward in our life. But same thing with thoughts, especially with the inner critic. So often for those of us who have a strong inner critic that we are not good enough, smart enough, or whatever enough you want to fill in the blank, that can help us be able to put it somewhere else and then pick up that I am God's child, right, and gladly say it, and that reminder. And the same thing with behaviors also, especially if we struggle with, like when we walk away from a conversation, something we shouldn't have said or done. This is a brain dump is good for that vulnerability hangover that you get in those kind of circumstances. Just put it down. Grace on the front, grace on the back, wrapping it around that. And then also, if we struggle with some behaviors we've had in our past and need to have space for God to fill us with his forgiveness as a reminder that that is already won and done for us. And so the brain dump, just write maybe 3 emotions on a page: fear, joy, and maybe contentment. And then just start writing things from your brain underneath there, whether that's from your day or from your lifespan. You could do it however you want. Kim, do you have any thoughts on the brain dump as I share about that?
I'm loving it. I should be writing this down, but I'm just absorbing it as you're saying that, because what it allows you to do is to practice some inner subjectivity. Mm-hmm. It lets you to take what's in your head, put it down on a page, which as a fellow writer, I love to do too. But then to step away from it and see, what am I learning from this? Mm-hmm. And I can see me putting this into a matrix because I love my charts. I don't say everybody has to do this, but then you're also adding in that wrapping law and grace too. Mm-hmm. So writing down with that the blessings that come with it, and then after you do that hangover that you're talking about, then I remind myself again that God loves me no matter what, and my friends love me no matter what. They may not have been happy with what I said, but they love me no matter what. I think that's beautiful.
Yeah, it's really helpful. And for my teens in particular, I give them an index card, and I just write the 3 things on there, and then I ask them to practice it each day for the week. These are all the things that Kim and I are talking about today are practices. Our brains are better, more receptive of these things with practice, just like learning how to play the piano when we do these things more than once, and work them into our lives in non-intimidating ways. Yes, you don't need a dissertation on these things. They are more likely then to come up in the moments that we need it. And yes, on my brain dump, sometimes I'll just write for myself: I am not my thoughts, I'm not my emotions, I'm not my behaviors, I'm a child of God. And that reminder is at the end of it, probably the most powerful part for me.
Well, and it's a good reminder too that some days your brain dump is going to take up a whole page, and some days you just can't even put it into thought yet. And
Mhm.
so I love that little practice if I'm going to do this much, because both of those are beneficial to the
Mhm.
brain.
Yeah, no, very
Yeah.
helpful. Awesome. So the next one, and we have two more. So the third out of four is practices of intimacy. And for practices of intimacy, which intimacy we mean relationship. It's a fancy word, I think, for relationship, but it also has more meat to it. That building of knowing and being known is what we're going for in intimacy, which does far more for our heart, soul, mind, and strength than simple relationship and
Yeah.
sharing space together. So intimacy, we're going to talk about gratitude. Gratitude. Kim, do you have any thoughts on gratitude to
Like
go
gratitude,
first?
one of my favorite topics. And you know how I mentioned before that, like the negative visualization helps us to open up our minds.
Mm-hmm.
What gratitude does, it opens up our minds to see bigger possibilities. It also connects what's happening now to past situations.
Mm-hmm.
Because whenever we record memories in our brain, we record them with emotions we felt. And so if we're in the middle of a problem or a struggle, we're going to be pulling up other things in the back of our mind where we've struggled in that way.
Mm-hmm.
And if we can connect it also to gratitude, we're
Mm-hmm.
going to start to see and be reminded of some of the solutions for
Ooh.
those things or the good things that have happened. So
Mm-hmm.
gratitude is just about training your brain to say, I am thankful for this,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
and to make practice of it, coming up with a certain number of things every day that you're thankful for, making a practice of thanking those people or
Mm-hmm.
thanking God for them. But you keep telling your brain again and again, gratitude is an important thing. And
Mm-hmm.
so those neural connections get strengthened and strengthened.
Mm-hmm.
I,
Mm-hmm.
you know, I'm thinking about you talking about the middle schoolers you're working with. This is a perfect thing to do at their brain stage,
Mm-hmm.
because recently their brains have completely changed
Mm-hmm.
and
Mm-hmm.
they're rebuilding, aren't they?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I like how it's a practice that we can put in that doesn't require feeling. Like, I think
Yes.
so often we think we need to feel thankful in order to practice gratitude. And really, more than any other emotion, even though like emotions usually there's a whole lot of faux pas with how we think they come about and things like that
Yeah.
too. But more than any other space in our lives, I think that gratitude actually creates that sense of contentment and that sense of thankfulness that we're looking for over time. And that has to do with that widened lens that we talked about in the beginning
Yeah.
with connectedness, right? That I can just simply see more of the reality instead of being stuck in this very small lens. That is likely from life circumstances. Like, we're not going to, put on some self blame and shame with this, that like, oh, I've been ungrateful for so long. Like, we're not looking for that. What we're looking for is simply opening the space of our brain in order to like receive a little bit more so we can see more and then go out and interact with greater empathy and compassion. Because we've been able to have that wider perspective, it will be easier to access empathy and compassion in areas of our life that are difficult or people who are difficult, because we are sitting in this space for a time that just has filled us, that has made us aware and brought the things to awareness that God has given us. Absolutely. Do you have a certain gratitude practice that you use, Kim?
Um, what I'm working on right now is just changing the way I word things, so
Mm-hmm.
that when something good happens, I'm not thinking, oh, that was really lucky, or wasn't that great. I'm actually putting into words of gratitude. So
Mm-hmm.
I'm grateful to God for doing this for me, or I'm grateful to, I don't know if you could put this in terms of vaccination. I just got my vaccinations. I'm so grateful for all the scientists who work so hard to do that.
Mm-hmm.
So just not only feeling good about something good happening, but turning that good thing into, who do I have to thank for this?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And look at how you're building that intimacy with people you've never met before, but realizing we're a community
Yeah.
working together to do this.
Yes, and this is why we put it under intimacy, right? That it makes us so much more aware of our connectedness as human beings and our need for one another, but in this realm that, again, has that sense of filling and being fed by God and provided for by God in this life, instead of feeling again a little left alone, and a little disconnected, which happens so easily. My favorite way to practice gratitude is highs and lows. I think we've talked about that on Mental Health Monday before, mostly because the person who taught me highs and lows, you simply state the low from your day and the high from your day, or the low from your week and the high from your week. My son is, he's a little bit older, but maybe some of the middle school brain stuff you're talking about, he likes to also mention the mediocres because
good for him.
There's good stuff in there too. I'm like, okay, all right. But the person who taught me highs and lows taught us that there's always a high, because God is always doing something, and it trains your brain to look for that then.
Yes,
instead of, it's just so easy to tuck it away or miss it, and it builds that intimacy with God then. What is he doing? And again, that Greg Finke phrase, I use it all the time, is, where are we going today, Jesus? Knowing that he is doing that beside me is building intimacy, and then feeding the gratitude back and forth. And that's a really helpful thing for us.
Well, and those are the neural connections you want to make stronger in your brain if you want to be able to handle the difficult things.
That resiliency.
Right. So if you're going to ruminate on the grateful things, ruminate on the good things.
Wow.
Because that's what
good.
You want strong. Yeah.
That is really good. And we forget that these processes are written out our brain over time. And that's something God has designed for us to be able to build and grow, that is tainted by sin and tainted by the brokenness of the world. But also there's a redemptive or restorative property that God has built in us as well. And that's what you're talking about, is that rewriting, is that restorative property that he's given us. By practicing gratitude, we're simply giving space for that restorative property that God's put in us. So awesome. Yeah. So the last one is practices of belonging. And so my favorite way to practice belonging is what I call welcome to the table. And here, this is the least complicated practice I think we could come up with, which is eat food together.
Works for me.
I know, right? Let's do it. Sign me up. And so I'll ask the listener, what are your favorite foods to eat with people? Or, what do you usually eat when you invite someone over? Or what are foods that make you feel connected to other people? The idea is inclusion. And it is so hard to be the inviter. I notice that really the absence of belonging and that sense of belonging usually comes into our life because we want to be invited, and we stopped or reduced inviting in our lives because it's so vulnerable. It's hard to do. But because Christ has invited us, because he's welcomed us to the table, if you will, then we can be the inviter. We are always invited. That is never lacking in our life. And so, I love to encourage people to eat food together, to gather around a table. There's so much mental health strength built in sharing and what happens around our tables.
Yeah. Well, the idea of belonging has three major categories, and those categories also give us some more ideas for things that we can do for belonging. And the first one is, you feel you belong when you're a part of a community where there is accountability, but there's also unconditional love, which of course is law and grace together. So if we look at a congregation, you've got those traditions and practices, and of course the 10 Commandments, that's the accountability, but you also know that if you mess up, you're still loved. You're still accepted. And so right there are some things that you can do for belonging. Again, go back to that brain dump even and say, I do belong because I am loved. Another aspect is, how can I contribute to this community that I belong to? And so that can take a lot of different forms too. It might be something big with volunteering, or it might be something just as important but private, like praying for the people and organizations. And when we remember those people we feel we belong to in our prayers, we're strengthening that connection,
Oh, neural
aren't we?
connections again. Yep,
Yeah,
love it.
yeah, those good connections. And then the last one has to do with how we care for each other. We feel we belong in a group when we see that group caring for other people, and when we participate in that caring and we feel that caring.
Mm.
So anytime, we can participate in a way of caring, that gives us a sense of belonging.
Those are three really helpful pieces. So we're going to look for vulnerability and boundaries, basically law and gospel in our spaces. We're also going to look for contribution. It's often thought of, I think, as service in some way, but I love how you have that kind of relational focus to contribution then too. And then care. And my favorite word for care is really noticing. We're going to just notice other people, what their needs might be, where they're at in their life, what's happening in their day, what their hairdo is. I don't know. It can be anything, but simply noticing is a really great way to start with that care component of belonging. And wouldn't it be cool to do a brain dump even just for that, for those three components of belonging you just talked about? These all work together. Well,
it's a good thing to remember too, if you feel hurt by a group that you belong to, take a look at those three areas and check to see, is my impression really accurate? So maybe I feel like I'm not being cared for because a specific need wasn't met. But if I can revisit that understanding, I can know, yep, I belong. That was a temporary thing. I can forgive.
And we can also ask for what we need then too, which strengthens belonging when we're able to ask for help and be a little assertive while not being aggressive about what we need. So we can say, wow, I missed this thing. Is there a way that I can find it, or I can seek it out by asking for it? So exceptional. I love it. That is really helpful. Man, that could be a whole nother Mental Health Monday series in itself, right? Very good. Well, thanks for sharing with us these practices, Kim. I would love to know from the listener what practice you're going to take away from here. And so I'm just going to, real fast, we said negative visualization was one, the brain dump, practicing gratitude in a few different formats, and welcome to the table for our belonging and our sense of belonging. So give us a shout out in the comments, whether you're live or whether you're watching the archive, about one of those things that you might take away today, and practice. For 7 days straight is a good place to start. 30 days is getting closer to a habit, and 60 days and beyond is more potential for really making a habit because of those neural connections. My words aren't coming out today. In our brain that have really been instrumentally wired differently because we've done those practices. Well, thanks, Kim. It's been a joy. I know we'll be able to work together again. We have some stuff in our back pockets that we're going to work on for the future. And so thank you, dear listeners, for joining us for these Mental Health Mondays. You can always find the archives at the Heidi Gaiman Writes YouTube channel and at HeidiGaiman.com. You can find Kim at KimMarkshausen.net. You can head over to my website for a link to that, to her website as well. Kim does a lot of speaking. Man, if you want to be able to have her speak specifically to your topic and the cognitive awareness and the information that she has available, I would definitely strongly encourage you to invite Kim into your spaces, and check out her book, Weary Joy. Right. Yes. And then I know that you have some stuff in the queue too, so we'll look forward to that. Awesome. All right. Well, thanks for joining us. We'll see you next time.
Bye-bye.